The morning of April 29th, 1945, was no different from the night before. Deep under the city of Berlin, in the Führerbunker, the lights were always on. The air was always thick and stale. The walls always shook from the explosions above. Adolf Hitler woke up after a few hours of sleep. He was a changed man from the powerful leader the world once knew. Now he was old, tired, and sick. His back was bent, and his hand shook when he tried to keep it still. He put on his uniform and walked slowly out of his room. His assistants were waiting for him. They looked nervous. They had news, and it was very bad. The Soviet army, Germany's enemy, had completely surrounded the city. Every road out of Berlin was blocked. Every bridge was destroyed or held by Soviet soldiers. The German army was broken. There were no more soldiers to send to the fight. The news was final. There was no way out. Hitler was trapped. For a moment, there was silence in the bunker. Everyone watched Hitler. What would he do? Would he order a final crazy attack? Would he try to run? He did neither. The news seemed to calm him. The waiting was over. The decision was made for him. He looked at the maps of the burning city one last time. Then, he turned to his staff. His voice was quiet but clear. "I will not leave Berlin," he said. "I will not fight a coward's battle from the mountains. I will die here, in the capital of the Reich." He would not run. He would not be captured. He would stay in this concrete room under the ground until the end. This was the point of no return. The man who wanted to rule the world had decided his own final scene. It would not be on a battlefield. It would be in a dark, dirty bunker, by his own hand. The clock was now ticking. He had less than 36 hours to live. Adolf Hitler was not alone in his underground tomb. The bunker was filled with people, but it was a place of ghosts. The air was heavy with fear and the smell of damp concrete. Everyone knew the end was coming, but no one dared to say it out loud. This small group of people formed Hitler's final, sad court. They were trapped together, waiting for the final act. The most important person was Eva Braun, Hitler's girlfriend. For years, she had been his secret. The German public never knew she existed. Now she was by his side, determined to die with him. She tried to keep a cheerful face, wearing nice dresses and smiling, but her eyes showed the fear she felt inside. Then there was Joseph Goebbels, the man in charge of Nazi propaganda. He was a small man with a twisted foot, but he was fiercely loyal. He had brought his whole family into the bunker, his wife Magda and their 6 young children. Goebbels believed so strongly in Hitler that he was ready to die for him, and to have his family die too. His wife, Magda, was a tragic figure. She loved her children deeply, but she was also a believer in Nazi ideas. Her face was pale and stained with tears. She was torn between a mother's love and her terrible loyalty to her husband and Hitler. There were also the helpers, the young secretaries who typed Hitler's last letters, the military aides who knew the war was lost, but still followed orders, the cook who prepared simple meals that no one had an appetite for. They were all scared, but they stayed out of duty or fear, or because they had nowhere else to go. These people spent their days in the dimly lit rooms of the bunker. They listened to the steady thump, thump, thump of Soviet shells hitting the city above them. The sound was a constant reminder that the enemy was getting closer. They had little to do but wait and talk about the past. They told old stories and pretended that everything might still be okay. But they were lying to themselves. Everyone knew the truth. The Russian soldiers were just streets away. It was only a matter of time. In this strange, closed-off world, Hitler was still the boss. His followers agreed with everything he said. They told him he was right, that Germany could still win. They were yes men, too afraid to tell him the terrible truth. This meant that Hitler's final mad decisions went unchallenged. The bunker was a stage for the last act of a terrible play. The actors were all in place. The main character had decided how the story would end. Now, they just had to play their parts. The clock kept ticking down the final hours. As the morning of April 29th dragged on, a strange and quiet fear grew in the bunker. Adolf Hitler had decided to kill himself, but he wanted to be sure it would work. He was terrified of being captured alive by the Soviet soldiers. He needed a way to die that was quick and certain. His plan was to use two methods at once. He would shoot himself in the head, and he would also bite into a small glass poison capsule filled with cyanide. This deadly poison was supposed to kill a person in just seconds. But Hitler was suspicious. He worried that the poison capsules he had been given might be weak or fake. He feared they would only make him sick, leaving him alive and helpless when the enemy soldiers found him. He needed to test the poison, and for this terrible test, he chose a surprising victim, his own dog, Blondi. Blondi was a German shepherd that Hitler had owned for years. He was often seen playing with her, and many people said it was one of the few times he showed any kindness. But now, in his final hours, that kindness was gone. He called for his personal doctor, Werner Hasse. The doctor was also a prisoner in the bunker, weak and sick himself. Hitler gave him a simple, awful order. He told him to take one of the cyanide capsules and test it on Blondi. The scene that followed was heartbreaking. The doctor took Blondi into a small room in the bunker. He forced the dog's mouth open and used a pair of pliers to crush the glass capsule between her teeth. The cyanide was released instantly. The poison worked exactly as advertised. Within moments, Blondi was dead. The test was a success. The poison was real and worked fast. For everyone watching, it was a chilling moment. If Hitler could do this to an animal he supposedly loved, what else was he capable of? It showed how cold and determined he had become. The death of his dog proved that he had no intention of being taken alive. It also showed that he had no more humanity left. The message to everyone in the bunker was clear. There would be no last-minute rescue. There would be no surrender. The Führer was going to die here, and he would use the same poison that had just killed his dog. The successful test on Blondi seemed to give Hitler a sense of calm. He now had the tool he needed for his own death. The final obstacle was gone. The next steps, his marriage to Eva Braun and his own suicide, could now move forward. The clock was still ticking, and the end was now even closer. With the poison test completed, a strange quiet fell over the bunker. The grim result had made everything feel more real and more final. There was no turning back now. In the middle of this doom, Adolf Hitler decided to do something he had always refused to do. He decided to get married. His bride was Eva Braun, the woman he had kept hidden from the world for over 14 years. She had been his secret companion, and now she would become his wife for less than a single day. The wedding was not a happy event. It was a ceremony of death. There was no music, no flowers, and no family. The preparations were rushed and sad. The ceremony was set for a little after midnight in the small map room of the bunker. A local official named Walter Wagner was brought to the bunker. He was not a wedding planner. He was a city councilman who had been pulled from his job, fighting in the city's ruins. He still wore his Nazi uniform, which was dirty from battle. The wedding party was very small. Besides Hitler and Eva, only a few people were there. Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann, two of Hitler's most loyal followers, acted as witnesses. The ceremony was short and simple. Hitler and Eva stood before the official. They stated that they were of pure German blood, a Nazi requirement for marriage. They said they wanted to marry. There was no time for anything else. As he signed the marriage papers, Hitler's hand trembled badly. His signature was shaky, a weak scratch on the page. Eva Braun signed her name, and for the first and last time, she wrote, Eva Hitler. The whole ceremony took less than 10 minutes. It was over almost as soon as it began. Afterward, a few of the bunker's staff came to congratulate the new couple. They tried to smile and act happy, but their faces showed the truth. Everyone knew this was not a celebration of life, but a preparation for death. Hitler and his new wife then went to a small room for a wedding breakfast. They were joined by a few secretaries and aides. They drank champagne and tried to talk about old, happy times, but the conversation kept returning to the war and to death. Hitler spoke again about his plan to kill himself. Eva Braun, now Eva Hitler, seemed almost happy. She had finally gotten what she wanted: public recognition as Hitler's wife. She did not seem afraid of what was coming next. The wedding was a bizarre and sad interruption in the final countdown. It was a last personal act before the final public one. For a few hours, the man who had caused a world war played the part of a groom. But the act could not change reality. The enemy was still coming. The clock in the bunker kept ticking, moving steadily toward the final, terrible moment. After the strange wedding celebration ended, Adolf Hitler had one more important task to complete. The time was now between 2 and 3 in the morning. The bunker was quiet, but he was not ready to sleep. He had to write down his last words for the world. He called for one of his secretaries, a woman named Traudl Junge. She was tired, but she came quickly with her notepad and pencil. She sat down, ready to write. Hitler began to walk slowly back and forth in the small room. He started to speak, and his words became his final political testament. This was not a letter of apology. It was a message full of anger and blame. He did not take responsibility for starting the war or for the millions of deaths. Instead, he blamed everyone else. He said the war was the fault of Jewish people. He said his generals had betrayed him. He claimed that Germany's people had not been strong enough to win, and for this, they deserved their fate. His voice was sometimes weak, but his hatred was as strong as ever. In this document, he also made his last official decisions. He fired his two most important followers, Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler. He accused them of being traitors for trying to make peace without his permission. Then, he named his replacements. He chose Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, who was in northern Germany, to be the new president. He chose Joseph Goebbels, who was right there in the bunker, to be the new chancellor. This was a pointless act. Hitler was appointing a government for a country that no longer existed. Berlin was falling, and his new leaders had no power. When he finished this long political speech, he then dictated a short, private testament. This was about his personal life. In it, he explained why he had chosen to marry Eva Braun. He said she had chosen to come to Berlin to die with him. He also repeated his wish that their bodies be burned completely so that no grave or memorial could ever be made for him. The secretary, Frau Junge, typed these documents as fast as she could. Her fingers must have been trembling. She knew she was typing the very last words of the Nazi regime. When she was finished, Hitler signed the papers. A few other people, including Joseph Goebbels, were called in to sign as witnesses. By 4 o'clock in the morning, the work was done. With the testament signed, a feeling of emptiness filled the bunker. There was nothing left to plan, nothing left to decide. Hitler had said his final words to the world. He had put all his blame and his hatred on paper. Now, the only thing left for him to do was to die. The documents were given to 3 messengers who were ordered to fight their way out of Berlin and deliver them. It was a suicide mission. For Hitler, however, the waiting was almost over. He had tied up all his loose ends. He could now focus on his final act. Just when it seemed things could not get worse for Adolf Hitler in his bunker, they did. The morning of April 29th brought news that was, for him, the ultimate betrayal. It came from a man he had trusted completely, a man he called his loyal Heinrich. That man was Heinrich Himmler. Himmler was one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. He was the leader of the SS, the secret police, and he was in charge of the concentration camps. For years, he had been fiercely loyal to Hitler. But now, with Germany collapsing, Himmler saw the end was near. He had secretly left Berlin and made contact with the Allies. Through a Swedish diplomat, he offered to surrender all German forces to the British and Americans. He did not mention this to Hitler. He was trying to save his own life by making a separate peace. The news of this betrayal reached the bunker by radio. An official from the German news agency had heard a BBC report about Himmler's offer. He immediately called the bunker to tell them what he had heard. When Hitler was told, he exploded with a fury no one had ever seen before. His face turned purple with rage. He screamed and shouted, calling Himmler a traitor, a liar, and a coward. He pounded his fist on the table. This was not just anger about the surrender offer. For Hitler, it was personal. Himmler was one of his oldest and most trusted followers. If Himmler could betray him, then no one was loyal. The entire world he had built was based on loyalty, and now that foundation had cracked. His rage was terrifying to watch. The man who had been calm and resigned just hours before was now a shaking, screaming madman. The people in the bunker were frightened. They had never seen him lose control so completely. When his screaming finally stopped, he fell back into his chair, exhausted and broken. The betrayal seemed to suck the last bit of fight out of him. Any small hope he might have secretly held onto was now gone. The man he trusted to lead his most important organizations had tried to make a deal behind his back. This event confirmed everything for Hitler. It proved that his cause was truly lost and that he was surrounded by treachery. It made his decision to die feel even more right and necessary. He immediately ordered the arrest of Himmler, but it was a pointless command. There was no one left to carry it out. Himmler was far away, and the Nazi state had ceased to function. The betrayal by his most loyal follower sealed Hitler's fate. It filled his final hours with a bitter, personal anger. There was nothing left to do now but to make sure his own death happened before any more betrayals could unfold. The countdown to the end entered its final, unstoppable phase. While Hitler was raging over Himmler's betrayal, another terrible drama was unfolding in a different part of the bunker. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda had made a final, horrifying decision. They had decided that they and their 6 children would all die together. Joseph Goebbels was Hitler's most loyal follower. He had decided that a world without Hitler and National Socialism was not a world worth living in. He and his wife agreed they would kill themselves. But they also believed their children did not belong in the new world that was coming. Their 6 children were named Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Holda, Hedda, and Haida. They were aged from 12 years old down to just 4. To them, the bunker was a strange adventure. They did not understand the danger. They played in the corridors and were given extra chocolate and cakes from the bunker's kitchen. They called Hitler Uncle Adolf. On the afternoon of April 29th, Magda Goebbels knew it was time. She gathered her children one by one. She told them that they were going to be given a special medicine by a doctor. She said it was because they were all very sick and needed a shot to make them better. It was a mother's last, heartbreaking lie. A doctor who was also in the bunker, Helmut Kuntz, helped her. He gave each child a sweet drink to make them sleepy. Then, as they fell into a deep sleep, Magda and the doctor crushed glass cyanide capsules in each child's mouth. The poison worked quickly. The 6 children, who had been laughing and playing just hours before, were now dead. They were laid side by side in their beds, still in their pajamas. When it was done, Magda and Joseph Goebbels were calm. They had carried out their plan. They saw their children's deaths not as a murder, but as a way to save them from a future they saw as shameful. To everyone else in the bunker, it was the most shocking and evil act of these final days. The news of what the Goebbels had done spread quietly through the bunker. A deep, cold horror settled over everyone. If a mother and father could do this to their own innocent children, then there was no limit to the darkness that had taken hold in this place. For Hitler, the Goebbels decision was the ultimate proof of their loyalty. He saw it as a brave and noble act. It confirmed his own belief that death was the only honorable way out. The death of the 6 children marked a point of no return for the bunker's mood. Any last traces of hope were gone. The final hours were now filled with a new, deeper level of dread. The end was not just coming for Hitler and his wife. But for everyone who had chosen to stay in this underground tomb, the clock was ticking down its final, desperate minutes. The afternoon of April 30th arrived. The terrible deed with the Goebbels children was done. A heavy, sickening silence had fallen over the bunker. There was nothing left to do but wait for the end. In the middle of this gloom, Adolf Hitler decided it was time for his last meal. It was not a grand feast. It was a simple, quiet lunch. The people who joined him were not his generals or powerful politicians. They were his two young secretaries, his cook, and his wife Eva. The meal was prepared by his cook, Constanze Manziarli. She made a simple dish of pasta with a light sauce. There was no meat. Hitler had been a vegetarian for years. The food was plain, the kind of meal you would eat on any normal day. But this day was not normal. Hitler sat at the small table. He looked tired and empty. The rage from Himmler's betrayal was gone. The energy from his wedding night had disappeared. He was now completely calm and resigned. He knew these were his final hours. He made quiet conversation with his secretaries. He did not talk about the war or his plans for suicide. Instead, he spoke about old times and his dog, Blondi. He told them how much he had loved the animal. He did not mention that he had ordered her killed just the day before. His new wife, Eva, sat beside him. She did not look sad or scared. She was dressed in her best clothes, her hair neatly done. She seemed almost peaceful. She had gotten her wish to be married to Hitler, and she was ready to follow him to the grave. She did not eat much. She seemed to be in her own world, thinking her own thoughts. The conversation around the table was slow and awkward. No one knew what to say. How do you make small talk when you know the host will be dead in a few hours? The secretaries tried to be brave and act normal, but it was impossible. The sound of Soviet shells exploding above them was a constant reminder of reality. The lunch lasted for about half an hour. When it was over, Hitler and Eva stood up. He thanked the cook for the meal. He then told his secretaries and the others that it was time. He and Eva were going to their private rooms now. This was the signal everyone had been waiting for. The last meal was over. The final goodbyes were next. Hitler shook hands quietly with the people in the room. There were no grand speeches. The simple, sad lunch was the last normal human act of Adolf Hitler's life. After this, there would be no more eating, no more talking, no more pretending. The clock had run out. He walked away from the table and toward his death. The last meal was over. Adolf Hitler and his wife Eva left the small dining area and walked through the bunker's main corridor. It was a little after 3 o'clock in the afternoon on April 30th. Everyone in the bunker knew what was going to happen next. It was time for the final goodbyes. Hitler first went to see Joseph Goebbels and his other closest aides. The mood was heavy and strange. There were no tears. Hitler's face showed no emotion. He simply shook their hands and thanked them for their service. He did not say he was about to kill himself, but everyone understood. Then he and Eva went to the main hallway near the emergency exit. This was where most of the bunker staff had gathered. About 20 people were there, including the secretaries, the cook, the guards, and other helpers. These were the people who had served him until the very end. Hitler walked slowly down the line. He shook each person's hand. His own hand was trembling, as it always did now. He did not look people in the eye. He seemed to be looking at something far away. He mumbled a few quiet words to each person. Some heard him say, "Thank you." Others heard him say, "Try to get out." His wife, Eva, stood beside him. She was smiling a strange, tight smile. She was wearing a dark dress, and some of the women noticed she was wearing her favorite perfume. She shook hands too, and even tried to say a few cheerful words. "Please try to get out of Berlin," she said to one of the young secretaries. Her behavior seemed unreal, as if she were acting in a play. The whole scene lasted only a few minutes. It was quiet and awkward. No one knew what to say. What do you say to a man you know is going to kill himself in the next hour? The only sounds were the muffled explosions from above and the low hum of the bunker's generators. When he reached the end of the line, Hitler simply turned around. Without another word, he and Eva walked back toward their private rooms. An SS guard opened the heavy metal door to Hitler's study. The couple stepped inside. The guard then closed the door behind them. The sound of the door closing was final. It was a soft sound, but in the quiet hallway it echoed loudly. Everyone was now standing alone in the corridor, staring at the closed door. They knew they would never see Adolf Hitler or his wife alive again. The waiting began. The staff did not move. They just stood there, looking at the door, listening for any sound from inside the room. The final act of the drama was now happening just a few feet away, on the other side of that door. The last seconds of Adolf Hitler's life were ticking away. The hallway outside Hitler's study was completely silent. The staff who had just said their goodbyes stood frozen, staring at the closed door. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the distant, constant thumping of Soviet artillery shells hitting the city above them. Inside that room, Adolf Hitler and his wife, of less than 40 hours, were alone. They had a pistol and several cyanide poison capsules with them. They had made their final decision. The people waiting outside did not know what to expect. Would they hear a poison capsule breaking? Would they hear a single gunshot? Or would they hear nothing at all? The minutes ticked by slowly. Each one felt like an hour. The tension in the bunker was unbearable. Then, at around 3:30 in the afternoon, it happened. A single, loud gunshot rang out from behind the heavy door. The sound was sharp and final. It cut through the silence of the bunker and seemed to hang in the air. Everyone in the hallway jumped. They looked at each other, their faces pale with shock. The wait was over. They all knew what that sound meant. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a few of Hitler's most senior aides, including his personal secretary, Martin Bormann, and the head of the SS Guard, Otto Günsche, stepped forward. They knew they had to go in. They had to see for themselves. They hesitated for a second, then opened the door and entered the study. The scene that met their eyes was exactly as they had feared, but it was still a shock. Adolf Hitler was slumped on a small sofa. He was dead. He had shot himself in the right temple. A pistol lay on the floor near his feet. Blood was running from a wound in his head and dripping onto the sofa and the floor. On the same sofa to his left sat Eva Hitler. Her body was curled slightly towards his. There was no gunshot wound on her. Next to her on the floor was a small crushed glass cyanide capsule. She had bitten into the poison instead of using a gun. The strong smell of bitter almonds from the poison filled the small room. Both of them were dead. Eva's face was contorted in a grimace, a common effect of the cyanide poison. Hitler's face was also twisted, with blood trickling from his mouth and the bullet wound. The aides stood in the room, looking at the two bodies. The reality of the moment was overwhelming. The man who had led Germany for 12 years, who had started a world war, was gone. It was over. After a few moments of stunned silence, they turned and walked back out into the hallway. They closed the door behind them. They looked at the waiting staff and simply nodded. Their grim faces confirmed what everyone already knew. The Führer was dead. The final act had been performed. Now a new and gruesome task awaited them: dealing with the bodies. The story of the Third Reich had ended with a single gunshot in a quiet room. With Hitler and Eva dead, a new and terrible task began. The people in the bunker now had to dispose of the bodies. Hitler had given very clear orders. He and his wife were to be burned until nothing remained. He was terrified that his body would be captured by the Soviets and put on display as a trophy. Several men were chosen for this grim job. They included Hitler's SS Guard commander, Otto Günsche, his personal adjutant, Heinz Linge, and Martin Bormann. They were strong men, used to following orders, but this was a duty that would haunt them forever. First, they had to move the bodies. They wrapped Adolf Hitler's body in a gray army blanket. His head was covered because it was badly injured from the gunshot. Eva Hitler's body was wrapped in another blanket. She was much smaller and lighter than her husband. The hardest part was getting the bodies out of the bunker. They had to be carried up 4 flights of narrow concrete stairs to the garden of the Reich Chancellery above. The men struggled under the weight, especially with Hitler's body. The stairs were steep, and the world above was a war zone. When they finally reached the top, they emerged into a scene of destruction. The garden was full of rubble from bombed buildings. The air was thick with smoke, and Soviet shells were still exploding nearby. They had to work quickly. They chose a small, shallow bomb crater for the burning. They placed the 2 bodies side by side in the dirt. Then, they went back down to the bunker and brought up several large cans of gasoline. The men poured the smelly gasoline all over the wrapped bodies. They soaked them completely. The liquid pooled in the bottom of the crater. The smell of gasoline mixed with the smoke from the burning city. One of the men took a piece of cloth, twisted it into a long stick, and lit it on fire. He then tossed the burning cloth onto the gasoline-soaked bodies. There was a loud whoosh as the gasoline ignited. A huge flame and a plume of black smoke shot into the air. The fire was intense, burning hot and fast. But the burning was not peaceful. Soviet shells began to land closer to the garden. The men had to take cover, crouching behind piles of rubble. They could not stay to make sure the bodies burned completely. They had to leave the fire and run back to the safety of the bunker. Because they were interrupted, the burning was not perfect. The bodies were badly charred, but not completely destroyed to ashes. Later, when the fire died down, the men went back out and poured more gasoline on what was left and lit it again. But it was still not enough. The job was done in a rush, under enemy fire. It was messy and frightening. The men had followed Hitler's last order, but not as well as he had hoped. They left the 2 burned and smoking bodies in the crater as the battle raged around them. The mighty Führer was now just a charred corpse in a dirty garden, abandoned by the very people who had sworn to follow him to the end. The fire in the garden went out. The men who had burned the bodies returned to the bunker, their terrible job done. Inside, a strange emptiness settled over everyone. The person they had followed for so long was gone. The purpose of the bunker had vanished with that single gunshot. Now, everyone had to think about their own survival. Most of the remaining staff tried to escape that night. They formed small groups and slipped out into the dark, burning streets of Berlin, hoping to break through the Soviet lines. Some were captured. Some were killed. A few managed to get away. The next day, on May 1st, Soviet soldiers fought their way into the Reich Chancellery Garden. They were shocked to find 2 charred bodies in a bomb crater. They could tell one was a man and one was a woman, but the bodies were burned beyond easy recognition. The soldiers suspected it might be Hitler, but they weren't sure. The news of Hitler's death spread around the world, but for a long time many people did not believe it. The Soviets were secretive about what they had found. This secrecy led to many wild stories and conspiracy theories. For years, people claimed that Hitler had escaped to South America or some other hiding place. The truth was that the Soviets had taken the burned remains and done a secret investigation. They found Hitler's dental records and confirmed that the teeth in the burned body were his. They had the proof, but they kept it hidden for their own political reasons. Joseph Goebbels and his wife Magda followed Hitler's example. The day after Hitler's suicide, they walked up into the same garden. There, with the help of an SS guard, they killed themselves. Their bodies were also burned, but the job was done poorly. The Soviets soon found their bodies, easily identifiable, lying near the bunker entrance. It took many years for the full story to come out. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, The secret files were finally opened. The world learned that the Soviets had kept parts of Hitler's jawbone and skull as proof of his death. In 2000, the Russian government quietly buried these last remains. The story of Hitler's final 36 hours is a story of an ending. It shows the final collapse of a terrible regime. The strong leader was revealed to be a weak and broken man. The loyal followers proved to be traitors or murderers. The grand dreams of an empire ended in a small, dirty room. The bunker itself was destroyed after the war. The site was covered up and forgotten. Today, it is an empty lot in Berlin. There is no monument to mark the spot. The German people have chosen to remember the victims of the Nazis, not the man who caused so much suffering. The final truth is this: Adolf Hitler died by his own hand in a bunker, a coward's death. He left behind a world in ruins. His story serves as a powerful warning from history about the dangers of hatred, absolute power, and the lies that people tell themselves and others. The last 36 hours prove that no matter how powerful someone seems, the truth will always come out in the end.